Breaking overnight, the girlfriend of that mass murderer, Stephen Paddock, she's now back on U.S. soil. Mary Lou Danley, she was greeted by the feds on the tarmac at LAX last night. You can see here. She is now officially, once again, being considered as a person of interest. And could she be the key to unlocking what everybody wants to know? The why, a motive in the deadliest shooting in U.S. history. Joining us now, criminal defense attorney and Democratic strategist Michael Starr Hopkins, and criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor David Bruno. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Michael, I'm going to begin with you. Why was Mary Lou Danley, why did she leave the U.S. and go to the Philippines?
You know, that's an interesting question. That's something that federal authorities are going to want to know, especially with that $100,000 being transferred to a bank in the Philippines. There's going to be a lot of questions that federal authorities are going to want to know. I think one thing that may be good for Miss Danley, may be interesting to look at, is the fact that she came back to the United States. Had she broken the law, had she done something that, you know, may put her in a position where she could go to prison, I think it's pretty unlikely she would have come back. She would have probably negotiated some kind of agreement to come back. So I think that there's going to be a lot of questions that are going to get answered in the next day, maybe 2 days.
We certainly hope so. And David, one of the questions that I have is, how did she not know something was going to happen? This is a guy that had 47 guns. Wouldn't that just make her feel a little bit uncomfortable living with him for all of these years? She had to have seen something.
Yeah, these are going to be the questions that we can anticipate. You know, law enforcement are going to have two goals here. The first is going to be to determine whether or not she or anyone else had any involvement or participation. And then number two, to answer the question why. And sure, we need to learn more about this relationship and what type of relationship they had and how often she was there. But one would think if you're living with an individual that is planning a crime like this, you would know something.
And Michael, she worked at Mandalay Bay, and it boggles my mind that Mandalay Bay employees, they were in that hotel room before the shooting, multiple employees. They didn't see anything suspicious. They didn't see any cameras set up. They didn't see any weapons or just an extreme amount of suitcases.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So the shooter brought 10 suitcases into the hotel when he checked in. He put a camera inside one of the service trays so that he could watch law enforcement as they came in and got ready to come into the hotel room. And so there are so many questions about what the staff saw, what they heard, what his demeanor was like. I think it'll be really interesting to find out what they have to say and what Mandalay Bay has to say about his repeated going to the hotel. Evidently, he had been at the hotel a week before. He frequented that hotel and done a lot of gambling there. So, you know, I think there's going to be some really interesting questions as to the why. What was he thinking?
Yeah, and the country wants a why, because quite honestly, sometimes it just makes you feel better trying to understand, if you can even understand the mentality of a psychopath. David, what is the next step in this investigation? So they talked to Mary Lou Danley, then what?
Yeah, well, they're going through anything they can. There were computers that were seized in the hotel room. They're trying to follow all the money and the bank statements, and they're doing all that. And then you got to go through all the surveillance video. And it's been talked about a lot on TV. There's tons of surveillance video. And essentially, they could probably put together, piece by piece, his entire weekend as to what he did. So it's going to be important to tie up all these loose ends. But this witness today is critical to get a lot of information as to what was happening in this individual's mind in the last couple of months, certainly.
Michael, when do you think we're going to have an honest discussion on gun control?
Honestly, I don't think we will. I think that there's small things that can be done to have background checks, but it's such a political hot-button issue. I don't think Democrats or Republicans will be able to have that conversation without it being diverted into other political avenues. And I think that's a loss for the country because, you know, I think all Americans agree that, you know, you should be able to have a handgun, you should be able to have a shotgun for hunting, basic things. But the idea that people should have access to AR-15s, AK-47s, automatic weapons, I think that's something that 90% of Democrats and 77% of Republicans all think is beyond the norm. And so I think it's something we need to have, and I hope that we do.
David, Stephen Paddock had a legal modification,
Right.
something called a bump stock, which basically turns a semi-automatic rifle into a fully automatic rifle.
Correct.
Do you think those
it's
rules
allowed.
will change? Yeah, it's legal.
Yeah, this is probably a change we're going to see first. Senator Feinstein had a prior bill on the floor that was not voted upon, but it was reintroduced this week. And yes, 12 of the firearms in the hotel room were modified to allow it to act as a full automatic weapon. And under the law, it's legal because it didn't permanently change the firearm. So it's one change I see coming pretty quickly.
All right. David, Michael, thank you so much for your perspective this morning.
Thank you so much. God bless the people of Vegas.
Yeah, the gun debate is going to be fascinating, and it's already ramped up in the rhetoric of the country.